And we are back, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Gabversity, where facts care not about your feelings, in particular, yours. It is your feelings that facts don't care about. Now, fingers crossed you are actually all asleep. Hey, Dr. Sexy. I was just saying fingers crossed you're all asleep, and then Dr. Sexy joins. So it's beautiful out here now. Summer's coming, and we are enjoying the weather. Welcome. It is starting to get windy now. We always enter this period of windiness before summer comes at the end of winter. This is winter, 80-degree days. Okay, so we were talking about the collapse of the Anasazi. Sri Baba, hello. And we were talking about the techniques, archaeological techniques that allowed us to figure things out. We also, Platinum Mimi, this podcast is dedicated to Platinum Mimi. Platinum Mimi is the reason that I can do more scopes and not work as much driving buses, so that I can dedicate more of my time to scoping for you guys. Greetings. She just Dendro dating. She just sponsored us with the equivalent of 500 people for 1 month at Patreon. 500 people for 1 month at Patreon, Platinum Mimi. So if anyone wants to bag out Trump supporters, coming from a mad-ass liberal, they are just as beautiful as anyone else, if not more, in many cases. All right, I will stay quiet now. But she's amazing. I mean, I love everyone, but, you know. All right, so the other thing we were talking about with the Anasazi, is that Plain Paradise, is that they were able to, without a writing system and without a heritable plan, because they weren't able to pass on things in writing to their successive generations, they were able to develop an irrigation system more advanced than what Americas have now in the southwest states today. They were able to support a higher density population than America supports today. How amazing is that? All right. So now we're going to talk about the 3 alternative types of agriculture that emerged. And this happened because we know that their counterparts to the south, the Mayans was just about to say, no, because the Mayans lived in a part of the world that was very wet. So they were able to develop these corns and I forget what the other fruit was, but it was corn, harvest crops. And there was something else other than corn. Anyway, but what happened was that the Anasazis, who lived in the modern southwestern states of the US, it's a very, very dry area. So they had to develop unbelievably skilled forms of irrigation because there was no flowing water and it was not a wet environment in the same way that it was for the Mayans. And that's why the Mayans were able to develop such a huge civilization when the Anasazis had a maximum of 4,000 people at any one time. Yeah, no, good question. All right, so here are the 3 forms of agriculture that they were able to develop. We have here one of the 3 solutions was called dry land agriculture. Ooh, not bad. Miss Ella Child knows her stuff, right? Very close, very close. Okay, which meant relying on rainfall at higher elevations that were really was enough rain to promote growth of crops in the fields on which the rain fell. Okay, so let's go through this again. They relied on rainfall at higher elevations where there really was enough rain to promote growth of crops in the fields on which they fell. So that was the first thing. The second solution was adopted in areas where the water table in the ground reached close enough to the surface that plant roots could extend down into the water table. So that how they knew where the water table was enough is amazing in itself. That method was employed in canyon bottoms with intermittent or permanent streams and a shallow alluvial groundwater table. So it was a matter of preserving and relocating water supplies. Okay. That method was employed in canyon bottoms with intermittent or permanent streams, shallow alluvial, such as in the Chaco Canyon, which I think is now in a preserved section of southwest US, from memory. Okay. Next, the third solution, practiced especially by the Hohokam and also at Chaco Canyon, consisted. I live in the region which you speak. Ah, awesome! Welcome aboard. That's pretty cool. So we had here. What did we have? Excuse me for a sec. Chaco. Let me actually try and put it this way so I can keep talking to you guys. Maybe this is a bit better. Makes my face look a bit fatter, but that's life. What are you gonna do? Experiment different locations. Sorry. Okay. Consisted of collecting water runoff in ditches or canals to irrigate fields. Right. So they collected water runoff in ditches or canals to irrigate fields. While the methods used in the Southwest to obtain enough water to grow crops were variants on those three types, people experimented in different locations. So that's quite interesting too. They had the desire to be creative with alternate strategies for applying those methods. Is an anthropologist and we had a dog named Chaco. How funny is that? Well, that explains your knowledge on this. I made a graph on my past relationships. It has an x-axis and a y-axis. Thanks, Dr. Sexy. You're very kind. I love that x and y-axis. That is too good. I'm going to use that. I'm definitely going to be using that one. All right. So, you people are terrible. Okay. The experiments lasted for almost 1,000 years. The experiments lasted for almost 1,000 years. Well, thank you all of you for your ego boost. I like you even more now. And many of them succeeded for centuries, but eventually all except one succumbed to environmental problems caused by human impact or climate change. What's interesting is that in this book they say human impact or climate change. That's a very persuasive way to deal with things. Okay, so now each alternative involved different risks. Okay, so here we go. One strategy was to live at higher elevations where rainfall was higher, as did the Mogollon. I don't know. And the people at Mesa Verde, if you guys know Mesa Verde, the people of the early agriculture phase known as the Pueblo Uno phase, Pueblo, but that carried the risk that it is cooler at high than at low elevations, and in an especially cool year. Okay, so there you go. So they are susceptible to years that are cooler than other years. Oh my God, that's so cool. Where they're not deep water sources as well as rain supply. Not in these areas. According to the research here, you had to pick one or the other, which was very interesting in that part of the Southwest, which is very, very dry. As some of you said you live there, you probably know the feeling. Streams on Mesa Verde. Yeah, they were saying that at Mesa Verde they'd get the water, but the temperature would be too cold at certain times of the year because of the elevations. An opposite extreme, so the opposite extreme was to farm at the warmer low elevations, which is what Sri Baba was just saying. But there the rainfall is insufficient for dry land agriculture. So, you either get the warmth and less water, or you get the water and less warmth. It was always a mix between the two. So the Hohokam got around that problem. By constructing the most extensive irrigation system in the Americas outside of Peru. I love that stuff. That stuff is phenomenal. With hundreds of miles of secondary canals branching off a main canal 12 miles long and 16 feet deep and 80 feet wide. Chaco Canyon to see the ruins. That's a great idea. It's still there, is it? That's amazing. When you think about it, they didn't have a writing system. And yet, despite that, they were able to build this phenomenally huge canal, which has survived till today. You gotta just, it's just quite phenomenal what humans can do. But irrigation entailed the risk that human cutting of ditches and canals could lead to sudden heavy water runoff from rainstorms, digging further down into the ditches and canals, and incising deep channels called arroyos. Red rocks and the Anasazi cave dwellings. It's amazing. Well, that's another place we're going to have to go when I go to the US on my book tour, in which the water level would drop below the field level, making irrigation impossible for people without pumps. All right, so there you go. So the problem is you create irrigation, but irrigation makes you more susceptible to flooding, which is what you see with the Mississippi River. Better than Grand Canyon. Less famous, but better. I already like it. All right. Also, irrigation poses the danger that especially heavy rains or floods could wash away the dams and channels, as may indeed eventually have happened to the Hohokam. Okay, interesting. So basically, once again, it's the fluctuation that you get over multi-decades of weather patterns. And without the ability to take records, it makes you susceptible to floods that may only happen once every 1,000 years or once every 2,000 years, right? Like last week. Exactly right, yeah. So now let's have a look. Another more conservative strategy was to plant crops only in areas with reliable springs and groundwater tables. That was the solution initially adopted by the Mimbres and by people in the farming phase known as Pueblo Dos at Chaco Canyon. However, it then became dangerously tempting to expand agriculture in wet decades, there we go, with favorable growing conditions into marginal areas with less reliable springs or groundwater. El Nino weather patterns, Southern Oscillation Index. See, once again, this is part of humanity. This is what humans do, right? So when times are good, people expand. But those good times are the equal and opposite of the bad times. So it's dangerous in those years to expand, because when it contracts, you have an overpopulation problem. Okay, and what happens is that without a long-term history of the weather patterns, it may seem that this new bounty or bountiful, situation is indefinite, and that's obviously your problem, right? This is our problem in human history. So anyway, let's move on. Hey, by the way, I'm losing my privilege. Okay, so let's have a look here. In wet decades with favorable growing conditions, the marginal areas, okay, population multiplying in those marginal areas found itself unable to grow crops and was starving when the unpredictable climate turned dry again, which is what we just said. And that's what happened to the Mimbres, who started by safely farming the floodplain and then began to farm adjacent land above the floodplain. Yeah, especially the USA, yeah. Willful blindness. As their population came to saturate the floodplain's capacity to support it. They got away with their gamble during a wet climate phase. Of course, when they were able to obtain half of their food requirements outside the floodplain. That's insane. 50% of their food requirements were coming outside the floodplain. You know what that's like? That's like building your house on the rim of a volcano, right? It might seem beautiful and fertile until the volcano does what it does. However, when drought conditions returned, that gamble left them with a population double what the floodplain could support. That's actually very interesting about mathematics. When you have 50% more, when it goes backwards, it's actually, you are now you need double food storage issues, I guess, yeah. And Mimbres society collapsed suddenly under the stress. Pompeii is another perfect example. Still another solution was to occupy an area for only a few decades until that area's soil and game became exhausted. Portland's built on a volcano. Is it still active? Then to move on to another area. That method worked when people were living at low population densities, so that there were lots of unoccupied areas to which to move, and it could be left unoccupied again for especially long. Okay, so basically, like what many other places around the world would do, which is they would live off a certain section of the land and then continue to occupy adjacent sections of land to allow one part to recover. In fact, that was in the Old Testament, which is what the Hebrew people used to do. Most southwestern archaeological sites in God's time were indeed inhabited for only a few decades. Crop rotating. Exactly, crop rotating. You just perfectly described that. Okay. Even though our attention today is drawn to a few big sites that are inhabited continuously for several centuries, that's Pueblo Bonito in Chaco Canyon. All right. So we can see that there were some major sites, and a lot of the ones that were rotated didn't survive the millennia. However, the method of shifting sites after a short occupation became impossible at high population densities. So we can see there are so many factors, right? Population density as opposed to population absolute value also makes a difference, right? So when people filled up the whole landscape, there was nowhere left empty to move to. One more strategy was to plant crops at many sites, even though rainfall is locally unpredictable. So you could try and catch the rainfall based upon where it may or may not land. So that was like probability theory. Right? They're like, well, let's plant it in all these lands, and one of them will get the rain, possibly. And then to harvest crops at whichever site's got the rain. This is what we were saying. So by the way, here is a map, which I will show you guys. Here is Mexico. This is Texas. That's New Mexico. And you can see that's the Mimbres, the Hohokam, the Kayenta, the Anasazi. Okay? And this is Utah and Colorado. Right? So that was where they lived, all these places. It's quite amazing stuff, huh? Texas, Mexico, Mongolo, Hohokam, Pacific Ocean. So there you go. Very interesting stuff. All right. I don't think we're going to finish all this today. That's my impression. All right. To good harvest and to redistribute some of the harvest from the stupidness, so it didn't have to receive right that year. Okay, so what they did then was they implemented 50% of Americans live less than 50 miles from the ocean. Yeah, that makes sense. That's Price's law, and many things obey Price's law. Not just that, but yeah, can't fake news that stuff. That's for sure. What was interesting is that they started adopting a communitarian-based or socialist-based system, which is, and you're going to start seeing problems here. What they did was the land that got the water, right, they used that to then feed everyone else, even the people who were on lands that didn't have water. Now, if anyone can see a problem with that, the risk of redistribution, right, required a complex political and social system to integrate activities between different sites, and that lots of people then ended up starving when that complex system collapsed. So you guys know that I'm quite a fan of socialism, but the facts are that it's a nice system, wrong species. So we can't fix socialism, we have to fix us. It's very true, very interesting. Fair share, yeah. It just doesn't work, does it? Alright, so now let's have a look. The remaining strategy was to plant crops and live near permanent or dependable sources of water. Alright. But on landscape benches above the main floodways, so as to avoid the risk of a heavy flood washing out the fields and villages. And then you practice a diverse economy, exploiting ecologically diverse zones so that each settlement would be self-sufficient. That solution adopted by people whose descendants live today in southwest Hopi and Zuni pueblos that has succeeded for more than 1,000 years. That's amazing. So that's the one that ended up being successful. The idea of, what do we call it? Self-sufficient societies which traded in between each other. Some modern Hopis and Zunis, looking at the extravagance of American society around them, shake their heads and say, we were here for long before you came, and we expect still to be here long after you two are gone. That's an interesting point. All of these alternative solutions face a similar overarching risk that is exactly. So all of them have the same risk, which is when you have good years, it's great. When you have bad years, you don't. What's that? Is that a shadow? I don't know what that is. Oh, it's starting to get cold. I might have to go in soon. All of these alternative solutions face similar overarching risk. Okay, so the problem is population growth, all right, resulting in turn in society becoming increasingly complex, interdependent, and no longer locally self-sufficient. Such a society then cannot cope with and rebuild itself after a series of bad years that a less populous, less interdependent more could have. So what's interesting is that absolute value in population is also a problem. All right, so as we shall see, precisely that dilemma ended Anasazi's settlement of Longhouse Valley and perhaps other areas as well. All right, how long have we gone for thus far? I think we will do a little bit more, but I am going to possibly go inside. All right, the Chaka Anasazi society flourished from about AD 600, right, for 5 centuries until it disappeared in about 1200. Now, what's interesting is that is before white settlement, right? So we can't blame European settlement specifically for these guys, or particularly for these guys, which is a good thing because we're able to remove that as a variable. We can see other methods of collapse of a society so that we can learn from that, right? Okay. They had the largest erections of buildings in pre-Columbian North America, even more than the barren treeless landscape of Easter Island. Why would anyone have built an advanced city in that wasteland, and why, having gone to all that work of building it, did they abandon it? It's a very interesting question, right? Why would that happen? So it goes to show you that it can happen to anyone. It could happen to the US now. It could happen to a city in the US. It's happening in parts of Russia, which are on the border with China, where you just have empty cities. Originally, when the Native American farmers moved and settled in about AD 600, they initially lived in underground pit houses, which is quite amazing. Around AD 700, which is funny, we talk about it like it's nothing, but it's 100 years that went past, right? The Chaco Anasazi, right, out of contact with Native American societies, building structures of a stone 1,000 miles to the south in Mexico. That's actually interesting too. Started the early hotel business, or maybe horses more nomadic. What's interesting is that by AD 700, the Native Americans of New Mexico had now been isolated from the Native Americans down in Mexico itself. So it's very interesting to see how the societies then diverged, right? Independently. So they independently invented techniques of stone construction, which is awesome, and eventually adopted rubble cores with veneers of cut stone facing, right? Initially, those structures were only 1 story high, but by the time they reached AD 920, so this is now 320 years after first building houses underground, they were able to build up to 2 stories and then 5 or 6 stories. That's quite insane that they were able to do that. They were able to go up to 5 or 6 stories with engineering without the ability of having written language. It's just phenomenal, right? Whose roof supports were logs up to 16 feet long and weighing up to 700 pounds each. Okay. Why was it that only at this place were they able to come up with such a complex political and socioeconomic society and these buildings, right? High rates of soil renewal from the runoff. All right, that's interesting. So there were high rates of soil renewal from the constant runoff, and that allowed fresh reanimation of life into the soil. Could extinction have been caused by whether man's intervention or war? Well, it happened before the Europeans came. So if there was war, it might have been inter-Native American tribal war, but it doesn't suggest that here yet. But definitely possible. Okay. What's interesting is that there was a habitable area within 50 miles of the location, and yet they didn't go there. They went to this place. Very interesting. Okay, so they had a relatively low elevation that provided a long growing season for crops. Now, a low elevation, as we said before, was good because you were able to get longer weather for longer periods of time. But the problem was that you had flooding. But flooding also helped reinvigorate the soil. So there's all these factors, hundreds of variables, right? And then we go nearby Pinyon and Jupiter woodlands providing the construction. Okay, and then there was also the nearby woodlands. So it's all these things that came together, right? And then the roof beams identified by their tree rings are still well preserved in the southwest dry climate. And they were locally available pinyon pines. I don't know if you guys have pinyon pines around where you are in Texas and other places around there. And the firewood remains in early hearts are of locally available pinyon and juniper. Okay. So they depended heavily on growing corn, actually, and squash and beans. And what's interesting is that those came to them from the south, from the Mayans, but they were very difficult to actually grow where they were, so they had to develop all of this amazing engineering. But they also used to have pinyon nuts, which were 75% protein, and they used to hunt deer quite a fair bit as well. All right, here are the two major disadvantages, which might help answer L.A. Child's point here. Right, we got here water management. Water management is a problem. Right, rain runoff, broad sheet over the flat canyon bottom, permitting floodplain agriculture watered by both the runoff, okay, and the groundwater table. Forest chickens. Okay. I'm going to go into. When the Anasazi began diverting water into channels for irrigation, the concentration of water runoff in the channels and the clearing of vegetation for agriculture combined with natural processes resulted around 900 AD in the cutting of deep arroyos in the water field, and which was below field levels. And by doing that, they destroyed the ability to get water from the ground tables underneath the ground. So it's interesting that the ecosystem is so delicate that you do one thing and change the other, and one thing changes the other, and they completely screw themselves. Such arroyo cutting can develop surprisingly suddenly for the prepper life. For example, at the Arizona city of Tucson, is it pronounced Tucson? Because it says here Tucson, but in French it would be Tucson, so I'm guessing it's a Tucson. In the late 1880s, American settlers excavated a so-called intercept ditch to intercept the shallow groundwater table and divert its water downstream onto the flood plain. $10,000 Hartsfield. Hey, hey, hey. Tucson. All right. Yeah. So what they did was, by doing what they did, they actually created a useless floodplain near Tucson. So that was like, they screwed themselves, poor guys. Like they wanted to get water, they got it, but in the wrong place. All right. That mistake cost them, but they were able to survive because it turns out there were other Native American sites where they tried to do the same thing. It cost them, but they died out. But somehow the Chaka Anasazi were able to solve that problem, or at least work their way around it. Number one, they built dams inside the side canyons, above the elevation of the main canyon to store rainwater. So they had multiple levels of dams. Brilliant, brilliant. This is what I'm talking about. This is what they should be teaching in school, so that you can have mad respect for Native Americans, instead of saying, oh, we need to put them on welfare or some crap like that. That stuff drives me bonkers. I'm like, man, these people are amazing. These people are freaking amazing. By storing rainwater coming down over the tops of cliffs rimming the canyon's north wall between each pair of side canyons, include Hawalapi. Not yet, so far. But maybe you can scope on that, Sri Baba. I'm still waiting on your scopes. And by building a rock dam across the main canyon. That's crazy. Imagine having to lift those rocks. Man, they must have been just built as. The other major environmental problem besides water management involved deforestation. There you go. Human climate change. Okay. Okay, we're going to talk about, number one, how, I think we'll do this on the next video. On the next video, I'm going to talk about how they were able to do this. They were able to, let me go in, it's a bit cold. It's getting really cold in here, getting really cold here. Alright, so let's go sit down. Hello. Okay, there we are. So, as we were saying, I like this better than calculus. It's funny, I always get different responses from different people. So let's put the light on, now we can see what we're doing. All right, is that okay? It's all good. All right, so now we can talk. We love our Native Americans, although Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota have rough culture clashes to us. Yeah, definitely requires cultural modulation. I'm very into that. I'm not into retaining a heritage, absolutely, when you are immersed in a new culture. There is some sort of blending that's required, but mutual respect for each other's differences is also beautiful. This idea of shutting everyone else down, authoritarians. All right, so here we are. Let's have a look. Deforestation. Okay, now we're going to talk about how it was able to be discovered. Okay. This was developed in 1849. Okay. In 1849, gold miners crossing the Nevada desert noticed some glistening balls of a candy-like substance on a cliff. They licked the balls. I'm dead serious, that says this, right? They licked the balls, right? And discovered them to be sweet tasting, but then they developed nausea. Guess what the balls were? Have a guess what the balls were. They were deposits made by rodents, a special type of rat called a pack rat that protected themselves by building nests of sticks, plant fragments, and mammal shit gathered in the vicinity, plus food remains, discarded bones, and their own shit. Man, they are balls you don't want to lick. Not being toilet trained, the rats urinate in their nests. This is a perfect example of how facts don't care about your feelings, right? And sugar and other substances crystallize from their urine as it dries out, cementing this midden to a brick-like consistency. Yeah, no, not really. In effect, the hungry gold miners were eating dried rat piss laced with rat shit and rat garbage. Oh, sorry. Can we move on, please? Oh. Okay. Pack rats gather vegetation within just a few dozen yards of the nest. After a few decades, the rats' progeny abandon their midden and move on to build a new nest because they're just filled with shit, right? While the crystallized urine prevents the material in the old midden from decaying. Wow, I didn't know that. By identifying the remains of the dozens of urine-encrusted plant species in a midden, paleobotanists can reconstruct a snapshot of the vegetation growing near the midden at the time that the rats were accumulating it. That is amazing. So because the rats pissed in their own homes, by going, and that piss protected the shit. There you go. LA Child, my dear, this is our assistant professor, uric acid. They were able to unwrap the shit and see what foods and vegetation were in the area at the time. Absolutely phenomenal stuff. All right, so that is called pack rat method of archaeology. So it turns out that the pack rat midden is a paleontologist's dream, because it not only protected the shit, but it wrapped up insects, bones, just a snapshot in time, right? It's just crazy. And what's interesting is that they also used radiocarbon and could compare to see that radiocarbon worked. That's actually quite amazing. Okay. So what's interesting is that no one knew where they were able to develop these types of technology and firewood, etc. Okay. Same as dinosaur dung, lots of info. God works mysterious ways. All right. So pinyon pines, which don't grow anywhere within miles today, but which had nevertheless somehow furnished the roof beams of the construction. That's quite interesting. So I wonder why that's the case. I'm thinking according to what they're saying here, that the middens were made during a time that there were pines that did grow nearby, Miss Franzmann. But they had no idea how old. They thought that perhaps just a century, right? It turns out from radiocarbon dating that they were over 1,000 years old. So it turns out that America, 1,000 years before that time, had these places that are now desert were full of forests, right? So very sorry to all of the people from the southwestern states. That serendipitous observation triggered an explosion of pack rat midden studies. So it turns out that in the southwest dry climate, that rat urine protected shit decays extremely slowly. They can last, have a guess how many years they can last. 1,000? 2,000? 3,000? Anyone know? $40,000 years. Platinemia right on the money. 40,000 years. Crazy. All right. So they were able to find pack rat mitten as long as needed. Repeat, 40,000 years. That's okay, Champson. Lovely to see you again. 40,000 years. So they are able to, using pack rat feces, they're able to see the vegetation of that area and the forestry of that area for the last 40,000 years. As Julio showed me my first pack rat mitten, I stood in awe that apparently fresh-looking nest might have been built at a time when mammoths, American lions, and other Ice Age mammals were still living in the US. That is just phenomenal. That is phenomenal stuff. Because that stuff, pack rats from that long ago, and America wasn't even joined at that time. It was in a different location. So it's quite amazing. All right, let's see how much we've got left of this lecture. We actually don't have that much left, so we could try and finish this, hit it home. Meteor impact. All right. So what they did was they found the entire period of the Anasazi civilization. So now it's all confirmed. 600 AD to 1200 AD. So they ended, if pack rats could talk. This is the really interesting thing about the Anasazi civilization. They were the most advanced civilization, right? And they had the highest buildings in America until 1880, right? So these societies that didn't even have written language were able to construct buildings that were not surpassed until 1880 in Chicago, right? That is phenomenal. And the society died well before, like more than 2 centuries before the Europeans came. So it's a perfect society to study in terms of why it rose and how it collapsed. It came from Iran in the US. All right, so here we go. So now we're talking about the Chaco Canyon in about 1,000 middens. Before that, they still call it a pinyon pine. Okay, so what's interesting is that in 1,000, the pinyon pines, were they called pinyon or pinnon? I forget how they're spelled. Where are we? Pinyon pine and juniper needles. So if anyone's familiar with pinyon pine and juniper needles, today where it's a lot of desert style or savanna style, where there's none of those around in the southwestern states, that used to be all forest. And in 1,000 AD, it stopped. Pinyon, there you go. Turns out they stopped. So when you look at it that way, it's actually amazing that the Anasazi were able to survive 2 centuries. Smells amazing. 2 centuries after the pinyon pines died out in that area. Okay. So those woodlands were completely and utterly destroyed. So this is real. This can really happen. Full of vitamin C. Yeah, it turns out they were 75% protein, according to what they were saying 2 pages ago. All right, it deforested. I wonder if Anasazi's ink is Machu Picchu inhabitants. There is desertification. Well, it's interesting you say desertification. What they're saying is based upon the growth of the tree rings, it showed that the rate of regrowth of the trees was less than the rate of the Anasazi people cutting them down. Paint something. Okay. So that's a pretty simple one. If you're cutting down more than are growing, then you're going to lose the whole forest. So that had an on-flow effect. Overkill of migratory herd animals. Hello. Okay. Supply also forced Shako residents to find a different timber source for their construction needs. Interesting. Interesting stuff. So they actually then went and found, just like if I spend more than I make, I'll go broke eventually. Mr. Purplebeard is back and dead on. Okay. So what they did, now here's something even more amazing, right? And this is why, probably one of the reasons why they were able to survive for 2 more centuries after the trees ran out, if not mitigated. What they did was they traveled 50 miles away and up by 1,000 feet to cut down more wood with no animals available to help them. They were able to get up to 200,000 logs, each one 50 miles away and up by 1,000 feet. Each one weighing 700 pounds were carried back down. Sounds like Easter Island. Exactly. Carried down the mountains and over that distance to the Chaco Canyon by human muscle power alone, with needles poking their eyes. Lost sound. That is amazing. These guys with their bare hands were able to go 50 miles across and up. That's true, might have helped. Yeah, that's true. It's true. Carried them down with gravity. That's true. Okay, a recent study, blah, blah, blah. So what they did was they then went to big spruce and fir logs. Advanced tech. 3 potential sources in the Chaco area growing at higher elevations on 3 mountain regions nearly equidistant from the canyon. So I don't know if you guys know these mountain ranges, but what they went to was they went to the Chusca. No TV, yeah, they were bored, true. The Chusca, the San Mateo, and San Pedro mountains. From which of those mountains did the Chaco Anasazi actually get their conifers? The problem is that they all look identical, supposedly, so they had to get a diagnostic signature. Not more evidence remains of them. It's amazing, isn't it, how quickly an advanced civilization can disappear? Very forested. Okay, there you go. Yeah. So what they did to figure out which mountain they went to was they used isotopes of strontium. Now, I don't know if you guys know what isotopes are, but basically it's when you get an atom that has an extra neutron. So the atom is slightly heavier, but the number of protons and electrons stays the same. I think that's true. Otherwise, it's the same neutron and extra proton or extra electron. I haven't done chemistry in 2 years. But it's got something extra that doesn't make it a new element, but it's not exactly the same. Okay. So what they did, explosives. No. No, what they did was strontium exists in isotopes. Okay, here you go. So there is strontium-87 and strontium-86. Okay, and what that means, the one of them is unstable, which makes it radioactive, and it decays over time. So based upon how much is left of the decayed strontium versus the versus the deuteron, versus the radioactive strontium, the ratio that is left, it's a logarithmic function in mathematics, and you can work backwards using exponentials and integration to figure out how long that strontium was there, based upon español de tuyo es muy bien. Muchas gracias, señora. Hola. All right. So it turns out that the radioactivity varied. Oh, there you go. Yeah, it's a sort of radiocarbon. That's exactly right, my friend. And they were able to find that keeps the others warm. Each of those mountains has a non-overlapping magisteria when it comes to the ratios of strontium in their conifers. So from 6 Chaco ruins, 52 conifer logs were selected for carbon dating. 2/3 of the logs were traced back to the Chusca Mountains and 1/3 from the San Mateo Mountains, and none from San Pedro. Claro que sí, lol. Encantado de conocerte, señorita. Señorina. I don't know how you say it. All right. So what they did was they alternated between both mountain ranges, but they didn't go to the third one. They never went to San Pedro for some reason. So we have established, you sound like my HK, a well-organized long-distance supply network. I don't know what an HK is, I'm sorry. Hotel San Pedro would no good, brah. No good. No good, brah. All right. So unequivocal evidence of a well-organized long-distance supply network for the Anasazi capital of Chaco Canyon. Amazing. So they had a train going, a human train. Oh, Hong Kong, sorry. You know, I should have thought of that. This is phenomenal. The human will to survive. So even though they basically decimated the forestry around them, housekeeper made. Even though they decimated the forests around them, they set up a human train. You're terrible, right? And not only that, not only did they set up the human train, but they set it up so well that their population increased even after they lost their local forests. It's amazing. These people are freaking amazing over generations. It's just crazy. So then we have the famous great houses in Pueblo Bonito, spaced out a mile apart. Hey, aloha. You are halfway between New York and Australia and Sydney. So there you go. Wonder what the day of the last tree was like. You imagine all sat around it? Me first. Nothing has changed. That's exactly right. It gives you a very cool perspective. That is good. I think that too about my neighbors. Okay. The enormous buildings had few permanent occupants except priests and were just visited seasonally by peasants at the time of rituals. Other archaeologists note that Pueblo Bonito, which is just one of the large houses at Chaco Canyon, by itself was a building of 600 rooms. Pueblo Bonito was a building of 600 rooms, right? And this is before Westerners made it there. That is just that is phenomenal. I'm telling you, that's the stuff that needs to be celebrated by all Americans. And that all those post holes suggest dwellings for much of the length of the canyons, hotels. But far enough to never hear your generator. Yeah. How many bathrooms? Invaded Babylon and Persia, they fled to sea. The sea peoples, yeah, you don't know. You don't know. Population much greater than 5,000. Some debates about estimated populations. Let's have a look. Excuse me for a moment. Arose frequently in archaeology, as discussed for Easter Island and the Maya in chapters of this book. One bathroom, long line. Long line. Okay, so what happened was, instead of there being the idea of the last tree, the society began to fragment. Interesting, huh? The society began to fragment, and instead of having one city, they had satellite cities, all within a distance of that city. Love you, long line. Hundreds of miles of roads. Interesting. So now the problem was rainwater, storing, the dam. Some cities got more water than others, some got more than others. Envy, resentment. Any of this look familiar to anyone? The surplus could feed the people living in other cities. Then they had, like the way Los Angeles developed. And then other people said, why? How come you're getting more food than us? Okay, here we go. Now it's getting interesting. Chaco Canyon became a black hole into which goods were imported, but from which nothing tangible was exported. Does that not sound familiar to anybody? Goods were imported, but nothing was exported. Tens of thousands of big trees for construction, pottery was all imported because they exhausted their local produce, local manufacturing. Nothing changes. The stone, tiny America, is hilarious. It is. Sounds like NAFTA. Even food had to be imported, which was shown by, the strontium isotopes in corn cobs. It turns out that already in the 9th century, corn was being imported from the Chusca Mountains 50 miles in the west. So now we see, when did the society collapse? In 1200. When did they start importing? In 900. So it takes 300 years. So when did America start importing? In the 50s? 1950? So by 2250, America should be dead, supposedly. This is what I mean about Gabversity. Tomorrow if trade stopped. This is the stuff that's important to discuss, as opposed to arguing with each other about which president said what stupid thing today, right? This is the stuff that matters. Hello, salty nymph. All right, so 50 miles to the west. Okay. The 12th century, now they were importing. Look at this. By the time we got to the 12th century, capitalism kills. It can kill if not regulated, yeah. What happened was, by the 12th century, which was the end of their civilization, they were now importing from 60 miles to the north at the San Juan River. So I don't know if anyone knows where the San Juan River system is, but they had to go even further now, 60 miles instead of 50 miles. Oh my God. All right, get ready for this. Get ready for this. Chaco society, by the 12th century, by the 13th century, so in the 1200s, became divided, runs through your town, San Juan River. Oh my God, this blows me away. The empire of the Chaco society became divided between a well-fed elite living in luxury and a less well-fed peasantry doing the work and raising the food for the elites. Oh my God. Oh my God. What is that? That is insane. As if that is not insane. It's all good. It turned divided between a well-fed elite living in luxury and a less well-fed peasantry doing the work and raising the food. Hilarious. It's California. Styles of buildings indicate a three-step pecking order. The largest buildings sounds eerily similar, doesn't it? Eerily damn similar. So we had the governing chiefs. We had the governing chiefs. Hey, paint something. Hey, salty nymph, welcome back. Um, so the governing chiefs, that was their houses, which were the minority but very big. We had the provincial capitals of junior chiefs, right, which were medium, and then we had all the rest of the homes, which were called peasants' houses. None of this looks familiar, does it? This is amazing. This is foreign to me. All right, now we're going to talk about the three houses. This is what I mean about how dumb we are as humans, that we cannot see beyond our own century. So, compared to the great houses, so the few houses, right, were distinguished by finer construction and veneer masonry. Reality check, brother. Interesting, huh? Great houses far exceeded the homesteads in their content of imported luxury goods, all the jewelry, the copper bells, the Hohokam pottery, the arts. It was all in, the elites had all of the art, they had everything. Okay. They had their own burials, they had their own graves, they had 56,000 pieces of turquoise and thousands of shell decorations for each of their graves. One necklace had 2,000 turquoise beads. That would be an equivalent of hundreds and hundreds of thousands in water. Okay. Garbage excavated from these houses contained a higher proportion of deer. My hand is cramping. You're crazy. And antelope bones. And so the peasants didn't get much meat. The elites were taller, better nourished, they were less anemic, and had lower infant mortality. Media impacted Indian Ocean. That was 3,000 years before this, supposedly. Interesting stuff. Interesting. Why? I wish I could cash these super hearts in. I don't even know what they do. I don't think I'm entitled to anything. Here's something interesting. These peasants were supporting the elites, right? But why were they supporting them and not moving back out into the country to hunt their own deer? And here is the answer. They could no longer revert to their original condition of self-supporting mobile little groups because this is 1200 AD, because the trees in the canyon were now gone, all of the dams were now gone, the ground tables was gone, the growing population now required an urban style living. So they could not go and support themselves, true faith, back in the country. More than 800 years later, nothing ever regrew. And the food is still there in the rubbish at the archaeological sites. They lost deer. What year did they settle? 600 AD. They lost deer. They had to then find smaller game, turkey, chicken, rabbits, mice. They started living on rats. This is exactly repeating the same problems, right? Headless mice in human dry feces suggests that people were catching mice and beheading them and eating them whole. But not permitted to hunt, yeah. Well, there was no such thing as owning land back then. Humans were cutting the heads off mice and eating them whole. That's how desperate they became. Delicious, huh? All right. The last identified construction at Pueblo Bonito, okay, was 1110. So basically they died in 1200. So 1110 was the last construction, secondary migration. What they did was they actually, oh my God. All right, now you're going to freak out. Now you're going to freak out. The last construction, right, was a building but for the first time around the building was a wall. They built a wall towards the end of their civilization. They had high quality stone, yeah. People were now causing strife in the streets. People were rioting, and so they were looting. And so the elites had to build a wall around their buildings to stop the people from eating them alive. That is just phenomenal. That is phenomenal stuff. And we think we've advanced. And the Anasazi paid for it. That stuff blows my mind. That stuff blows my mind. You got no idea. Oh my God. How, you know what? Life is ironic. And if God exists, God is a joker. God is a joker. He just sits back and laughs because we just do the same stuff. You know? So by the time we reached 1250, which was basically the collapse of the society, civil war had begun. People were killing each other. They were burning each other's cities. That's right, same shit, different spell. No, they were just killing each other. They started to have intertribal warfare. Interesting, huh? The lighter skin versus the darker skin. That one I'm kidding, but you never know, right? Then they started eating their enemies' bodies. So that's when the cannibalism began. Hundreds of non-European societies at that times were practicing cannibalism. They took two forms: eater of the bodies of enemies killed in war. So these guys took on the practice of eating the bodies of enemies killed in war, or eating one's own relatives who had died of natural causes. In fact, it turns out that the New Guineans, who are not far from Australia, he calls desertification. Yeah, that's true as well. Actually, a proponent of that is a guy called Alon, I forgot his name, late for dinner, you get the cold shoulder, ooh. I forget his name, but he's from Rhodesia, he's 81 years old, and he's actually an expert on desertification, and talks about what you said. Here's what's interesting, to show you how all humans live in their own universes, right? And this is perfect when people argue who are pro and against Trump. Alan, that's the guy. That's the one, Alan, yeah. Alan something. The New Guineans, who are just north of Australia, they actually look at Western burial customs as disgust because they are not doing them the honor of eating them. We, as burying our relatives, are not doing the honor of eating them. Goes to show you. One of my best workers quit his job with me in 1965 in order to partake in the consumption of his recently deceased son-in-law. There have also been many archaeological finds of ancient human bones in context. Well, I mean, it's stupid maybe to get offended because Russians, when they were starving, started eating each other. Lots of people, does that mean we'll be finding human meat at Walmart soon? Probably outside Walmart. Probably people trying to leave Walmart get killed and eaten. So it's very interesting. But it's interesting that it starts to happen. Natives in North America are phobic. Yeah, they're just phobic in general of everything. The thing is, it's because of the identity politics. If you realize that you are just another expression of the Native American, then whatever happened to them happened to you, right? You in their situation would have done the same thing. Right? This idea that somehow some people are better or worse, it just is ridiculously illogical. I don't even want to waste my time with it. Yeah. Nevertheless, many or most European and American anthropologists brought up to regard cannibalism and horror in societies are also thought of it practiced by people they had admired and studied. Interesting. Hunger is hunger, eh? Yeah. So it turns out that a lot of people who study at Western universities and then go out into the and meet the people they're studying become horrified to see that their people are eating their dead relatives. Van Helsing, yeah. Interesting stuff. I think. Oh, we're almost done. I don't know if I should stop here because we're almost done. Uh, I don't know. Maybe we can talk about cannibalism next time, or maybe just end it here. All right. So here we go. So the way that the Anasazi did it was towards the end when we were decaying. The society was decaying. See, I say we because I consider we are all humans, so we are part of this experience. People smashed into other people's houses, killed them, and ate them. Yeah, that's right. That's true. That's right. Yeah, if they were out of barbecue sauce. So they would actually, all of us placed in the same situation would react the same. Well, it looks that way, doesn't it? It does look that way. So what's the ethnicity? I conjecture Middle Easterners. They are descendants. Well, they are part of the Native American conglomerate, which are descendants of the Sinto-Tibetic section of the world. And there were Aboriginals there before them, but they wiped them out. Okay. Oh my God. You know what they did? Would be similar. Yeah. 10 pounds I should lose. They they cracked open the bones and they sucked out the marrow of their enemies. They also boiled them in pots. They cooked the human flesh in pots. Yeah. When New Zealand was found by current, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. I've seen some with red hair. Yeah. Negative vibe food source. Yeah, I know, not good. Here we are. The site is that dried human feces, well preserved after 1,000 years in that climate, proved to contain a human muscle protein, which is not in normal human feces. No, this is 1200 AD. AD, so only 1,000 years ago. Same genome as you and I, yeah. Yeah, I'm not into dividing people amongst this superficial skin difference or slight difference eye shapes. This is ridiculous. This makes it probable that whoever attacked that site killed the inhabitants, cracked open their bones, boiled their flesh in pots, scattered the bones, and relieved himself or herself by depositing feces in the very toilet that they had used to cook their victims in the first place. Okay, talk about that. You kill them, you cook them, and then after you eat them, you then take a dump in the pots in which you cook them. Amazing stuff, huh? The final blow, here we go. The final blow, on top of all of that, on top of building the wall, on top of intertribal warfare, multitasking. On top of everything we've brought up, which is basically identical to what's happening today, on top of all of that, there was a drought. So they were all killing each other by now, intertribal warfare. We had the elites versus the peasants. We had the elites building a wall. We had NAFTA, which was the importing of stuff and no exporting. All of that together, killing each other. Then there was a drought. And that's it. That's it. See you later. The outer settlements died out. The elitists who were living off the peasants then weren't able to import things anymore. Goes to show you that you need the working class. Here we go. A model for the end of the which Europeans did not observe is what happened in the Pueblo in Revolt 68 against the Spaniards. To my friend gave me diarrhea. Tell me about it. Who's your daddy? As in Chaco and Sadi settlers, the Spaniards had extracted fruit from local farmers by taxing them, and those food taxes were tolerated until a drought left the farmers themselves short of a broken the revolt. All right. Do you believe it is their answer? Maybe some active hybrids. You never know. And full of shit. We got lucky. Remained largely empty until the Navajo sheep herders reoccupied it 600 years later. So that was it. So basically that was the end of them, and it was reoccupied 600 years later by the Navajo. Because the Navajo did not know who had built the great ruins that they found there. They referred to those vanished former inhabitants as the Anasazi, meaning the ancient ones. Not. I know, that would help you lose weight, wouldn't it? So the reason they called the Anasazi is because the Navajo called them the ancient ones. The Southwest American tribe. Troy Ball is back. That's how you know Troy Ball has entered. What actually happened to the thousands of Chacoan inhabitants? By analogy with his historical witness abandons, which in the 1670s, probably many people starved to death. So many people starved to death. Ancient ones. It's not BC, it's AD, 1200 AD. 600 AD to 1200 AD. The Navajo came in 1800 AD. 1600 BC is the Babylonian era. They're different things that we're talking about. Some people killed each other. The survivors fled to other settled areas in the southwest. It must have been a planned evacuation because most rooms at the Anasazi sites lack the pottery and other useful objects that people would have been expected to take with them in the planned evacuation. Okay. In contrast to the pottery still in the rooms, Ananoki related, I'm not sure. They weren't brought up in this thing, so possibly not directly. There you go. So there were some occupants, the elitists. Oh, here's some good news. A lot of the elitists were killed and eaten by the working class. There you go. Yeah, that's very likely. So there you go, elites. Be careful because the working class may kill you and eat you. The settlement to which Chaco survivors managed to flee includes some pueblos in the area of mountains. Chaco Kenny House. Has anything changed? Seriously, has seriously anything changed? Let them eat cake. Chaco styles are probably been founded to date. Okay, so next. They calculated that the valley's actual population at various times varied from AD 800 to 1350, based upon the number of houses at times. They were able to then work out the corn harvest, the tree rings, the droughts. So all of that is based upon how they were able to extract this information. And it was basically by 1300 AD, right? It's now definite. At 1300 AD, right, there was only enough food produced to help about 400 out of the 1,000 people that were left. Where did they originate from? Just like Native Americans were slowly coming down from the north after they were able to get into Alaska from Russia, from coming up from Mongolia, Russia, Alaska, and then they came down all the way down, and they kept migrating downwards and downwards, and these certain people settled there. Now, why did the last 400? Yeah, they got heaps of DNA evidence. If you look back to what I was saying about the rat crap. It's huge. It's like fossilized nutrition. Blah. Okay. Why did the last 400 people stay? I think this is related to Americans and people in the UK. Why do people still remain in the UK today after it's in a state of collapse? Right? It's a very interesting thing. So we have some hypotheses. Perhaps the valley had deteriorated for human occupation in other ways. Soil fertility had been exhausted. Forests had now been gone, original trail mix. Yeah. Perhaps the explanation was complex human societies require a certain minimum population size to maintain institutions that the citizens consider to be essential. That is interesting. So certain institutions that humans consider, common theme for humanization collapse, yeah. Certain institutions that we in the West believe to be unbelievably vital to what it means to be a citizen of that place need to be run, and for that reason a minimum population was required to keep it running. like a skeleton staff. So how many New Yorkers would choose to remain in New York City if 2/3 of their family and friends had just starved to death or fled? If there were no more subway trains, no more taxis, and no more offices or stores, how many would stay? I wonder. About 12. Hopefully 0. What's interesting is that it's never 0. It's always about 10% of the population, according to this book. Why does 10% decide to stay? I find that interesting. Change is fearful. I mean, I would like to live in a city where there's not many people around. That sounds pretty cool. Moving to California. There's a lot of Californians moving next door into, is it Wyoming or something? Optimism for regrowth. Stubborn. Well, it's the same in every society. So, for example, the Phoenician society, right, which lasted for 8,000 years and was wiped out in 385 BC, some people remained, and they were the ancestors of the Lebanese. The Byzantine Empire, some people remained, and that tiny portion are the Greeks. The Roman Empire, some people stayed, and they are the Italians. So it's amazing that each empire at the end has a little remnant of people remaining. And they just, it's like when the sun dies, it turns into a white dwarf for like the next 100 million years or whatever it is, 100 billion. Very interesting stuff. So along with those, Anasazi and Longhouse Valley, Anasazi faithfully follows our mission started. Check them out. All right. So as we said, the collapse. Remember that the collapse takes 300 years. So in other words, Great Britain is somewhere within that 300 years of collapse. So is America, it seems, unless that changes. But once again, once the world moves to China, and China becomes the new West, America might still remain, but just like Greece and like Italy and stuff, like it just sort of chugs along. That might be what happens, unless people are able to, somehow reverse history. What's interesting is that the surrounding places also collapsed. Go West, young person. Yeah, hence the West, the name of the West, right? I mean, it just keeps going around. And it's Middle East was Tigris, Euphrates, and now look, exactly. Well, that's exactly right. In fact, I was talking about that with Pompous on the Gabsmack channel, about the Sumerians who invented writing. And then they passed that on to the Phoenicians who invented the alphabet. Blah, blah. Yeah. There's a really good lecture on YouTube called 1186 or 1185 BC. And it's a 2-hour lecture which talks about every single factor that resulted in the collapse of the first ever Western superpower, which was the Mesopotamian, Sumerian, Akkadian, Babylonian, Phoenician. The westward expansion process, Phoenicians and their boats, damn straight. America didn't invent writing. I had someone call me an idiot yesterday because he thought that white people invented everything. I thought that was hilarious. Like, what does your skin color have to do with anything? How does that even make sense? Oh, God. All right. Salinization from irrigation agriculture. Cold. Religious trap. I like that name. All right, we're almost done. 2 pages left. High altitudes, fluctuating temperature, marginal circumstances for agriculture, tribalism. I don't think tribalism is a cause. I think tribalism is a symptom. So when I see in America people clashing at this point of this class warfare, you all bleed blue. Nazis are coming back. The Second Civil War is coming back. I'm very happy for you, my friend. Dust bowled it all like idiots. Yeah. As I say, those type of wars, those inter-disputes and what's happening in the UK and Brexit and America, all of this, I don't think these are causes. I think these are symptoms. Oh, my pleasure, Sri Baba. I love having you here. Without you guys, it's nothing. And massive thank you to Platinum Mimi again, who honestly, without her, I wouldn't be sleeping or doing way, way less scopes. Despite these varying proximate causes of abandonments, all are ultimately due to the same fundamental challenge. People living in fragile and difficult environments and adopting solutions that were brilliantly successful and understandable in the short run but failed in the long run will predict a global collapse. Yeah. Good night, Sri Baba. All the best. So in the short run, their amazing ingenuity in engineering was brilliant. In the long run, they got screwed. That's because humans lack the ability to see far enough ahead in 4 dimensions. We've spoken about this so many times. Here you go. That should make us modern Americans hesitate to be too confident about the sustainability of our first world economy, especially when we reflect how quickly the Chaco society collapsed after its peak in the decade AD 1110 to 1120. It was only 80 years later that it collapsed. Doesn't take that long. America was at its peak in 1943. And now look, here we are, 80 years later, and it's dying on its feet. So every generation should never take what they have for granted. Within our 5-factor framework, right, 4 of those factors played a role in the Anasazi collapse. They were human environmental impacts, right, which we just spoke about, the flooding, the cutting, the damming, irrigation, but the Italians still rock. They didn't have FDR. Climate change in rainfall and temperature, and its effects combined with human environmental impacts. Internal trade, right? And the political factors. Have to go. Yeah, I think we're almost done anyway. The only factor that was not listed, World War II saved America, not FDR. World War II is what made America the superpower, yes, but that was only because of the collapse of the British Empire. So once again, they invented everything, of course they did. Collapse is external enemies. While the Anasazi didn't attack each other, the civilizations of the US Southwest were too distant from other popular societies to have been seriously threatened by any external enemies. So they turned on each other. It wasn't external enemies. That's a really good thing because it shows you that a society can implode. Right, very easily. You don't have to blame Westerners or white people or black people or whatever other people or this person or short people or dumb people or one-eyed people. You know what I mean? Okay, that is relative. Yeah, the ultimate cause of abandonment. Nearby trees and grow. Okay, so the conclusion is that many things that happen in past societies, right, reflect in our own destiny today, which we've already realized, right? So we're pretty almost done. House owners, investors, politicians, university administrators. Is free-range human better for you? We forget that conditions fluctuate and we may not be able to anticipate when conditions will change. By that time, we may already have become attached to an expensive lifestyle, leaving an enforced, diminished lifestyle or bankruptcy as the sole outs. And there you go. That is a very good moral to end this scope on. And we have to say to everybody, Gab smacked where facts clearly don't care about our feelings. Massive dedication to Platinum Mimi. That was so much fun. Love having you guys on here. Touted the champs and hilarious. Love you all, man. Alrighty, I'm going to go do some quantum mechanics. All the best. You're more than welcome. Love you guys right back.